When you look at a blueprint for a skyscraper, there is this comforting, undeniable logic to it.
Right, yeah, it's all mapped out.
Exactly. Every steel beam is calculated, every load-bearing wall is planned, and the tension of the suspension cables is just, pure, unadulterated math.
It's a binary equation, really. Effort plus raw materials equals a predictable result.
Right. You follow the instructions, you pour the concrete, and eventually you have a landmark. It's clean. It makes sense.
And there is a deep human comfort in that predictability, especially when you're investing like a massive amount of time or money into a project.
But then you look at the architecture of a massive pop cultural moment. A piece of art that comes along completely dominates the radio and perfectly defines an era.
Yeah, and suddenly that pristine blueprint is just gone.
Totally gone. The math completely falls apart.
Replaced by chaos, sheer physical exhaustion, and sometimes, honestly, a series of complete and utter coincidences.
Which is wild to think about.
It is. The structural integrity of a hit album often relies entirely on intangible things like a specific mood in a room, interpersonal friction, or even just a random piece of recording equipment malfunctioning.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. For you listening right now, we are tackling something massive. We are looking at Genesis's monumental 1991 14th studio album, We Can't Dance.
A huge, huge record.
Oh, massive. And our mission today is to uncover a mystery hidden within the liner notes. We're going to figure out how a band on the absolute brink of permanent fracture, exhausted by personal tragedy, completely fragmented by their own massive solo successes, how did they somehow reconvene to create a 71-minute multi-platinum masterpiece?
It really shouldn't have happened.
It shouldn't have, but they did. And they made something that not only captured the zeitgeist of the early 90s, but actively critiqued it. Okay, let's unpack this.
Well, to really understand this, we have to frame this album not just as a collection of catchy songs, but as a pivotal cultural artifact. And more than that, it represents the definitive end of an era. This was Phil Collins's final album with Genesis before he officially left the band in 1996.
So it's basically a swan song.
Exactly. We Can't Dance is the sound of a closing door. It's the grand finale of a very specific, highly lucrative alchemy between three distinct musicians, Phil Collins, Tony Banks, and Mike Rutherford.
I want you to think about a time in your own life when you successfully collaborated with a group of people after a really long break. Maybe it was an old sports team or a work project with former colleagues.
It's never easy.
No. Think about how incredibly hard it is to get that magic back. People change, egos grow, lives move on.
Yeah, you step back into the room and the chemistry is just off.
Exactly. That's the exact tension Genesis was facing, but on a global, multi-million-dollar scale. Before we look at the success of this album, we really need to examine the deafening 3.5-year silence that preceded it.
That silence is the crucial foundation. To understand the creation of We Can't Dance in 1991, you have to rewind the clock to July 1987.
Right, the end of the previous era.
Right. Genesis had just finished their world tour for the Invisible Touch album, and when I use the word grueling to describe this tour, I am not exaggerating at all.
Grueling is almost an understatement.
It really is. They played 112 dates.
Wait, 112 stadium dates?
Yes, 112. That is an absolute marathon. An estimated 3.5 million people attended that tour over its run.
I just want to pause on that number for a second. 3.5 million people. That is the population of a small country screaming your name, demanding your energy night after night.
The psychological weight of that scale of touring is, it's really hard to overstate. You're dealing with constant time zone changes, endless travel, the physical demand of performing for 3 hours a night.
And just the sheer volume of that much humanity directed at you.
Exactly. And that kind of global adoration can actually be incredibly isolating. It took a massive personal toll on the band members.
Especially on bassist and guitarist Mike Rutherford, right?
Yes, particularly him. During that period of intense global exposure, he was dealing with profound, quiet, private trauma. He suffered the death of his father, and shortly after, he and his wife nearly lost their son, Harry, during a very difficult birth.
Oh, wow. The emotional whiplash there is just unfathomable.
It really is.
You were standing in front of 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium, playing pop rock anthems, being idolized as a rock god. And then you step off the stage, the ringing in your ears fades, and you are a grieving son and a terrified father.
The contrast between the bright stadium lights and that intense private darkness, it makes complete sense why they just stop, you hit a wall.
You really do. And nature abhors a vacuum. During that 3.5-year hiatus, they all went their separate ways.
And found massive success doing it.
Oh, definitely. Phil Collins achieved stratospheric, unprecedented solo success. I mean, his 1989 album, but seriously, was a global phenomenon. It was unavoidable on the radio.
It was everywhere. And meanwhile, Mike Rutherford found his own massive chart-topping success with his side project, Mike and the Mechanics.
So you have a situation where two of the three guys don't actually need Genesis anymore.
No, the mothership is completely optional at this point.
Totally. Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford fully expected Phil Collins to just walk away. They assumed he was going to leave the band right then and there. And logically, why wouldn't he?
From a purely financial or ego-driven standpoint, leaving was the expected move. He had outgrown the band.
Right.
The band had originally agreed to get back into production in 1990, but because Collins' solo tour was so massive and lengthy, they had to push the reunion to 1991.
Which just adds to the tension.
Exactly. What's fascinating here is why he bothered to come back at all. Collins could have commanded any studio in the world, hired the absolute best session musicians, and dictated every single note of his music without compromise.
He had a blank check.
Completely. But he chose to return specifically because of the unique improvisational songwriting dynamic he shared with Banks and Rutherford. He actually missed the collaborative friction.
I look at that, and it totally defies the typical rock ego trajectory. It's like a superstar CEO who just took a massive company public, made billions, and then decides to go back to their tiny college startup just because they really, really miss the messy brainstorming sessions in the garage.
That's a perfect analogy. He didn't want a room full of yes men. He wanted the guys who would argue with him over a chord progression.
He craved the pushback.
He really did. They had this shorthand, a way of communicating musically that you simply cannot buy or fabricate with hired session players. When you've been playing with the same two guys for decades, there is a telepathy there.
But deciding to reunite in theory is very different from actually executing it in practice.
Oh, absolutely.
So they agree to come back. But how do you actually capture lightning in a bottle again after so much time and personal evolution?
You isolate yourselves, you go to a farm.
Right, specifically the farm, their private recording studio located in Chiddingfold, Surrey.
From March to September 1991, they retreated into this space. And this is where their methodology becomes truly remarkable.
Because they had no songs, right?
None. They walked in with absolutely no pre-written material. Not a single lyric, not a melody line, not even a loose concept.
That is just, I mean, that's wild.
It is. They walked into the studio with nothing but their instruments and 3.5 years of separate lived experiences.
The bravery of that. Or maybe the hubris. But it worked. Everything on this album was born from 2.5 months of long, grueling, improvisational jams.
Which is an exhausting way to write.
Totally. I want to picture this room. You just have Tony Banks and Mike Rutherford plugging in, starting to play chords, feeling out a vibe. And Phil Collins fires up a drum machine to lay down a repetitive pattern, and he just starts singing over it.
But he wasn't singing actual words.
Right, he was singing placeholder or dummy lyrics, just making phonetic sounds to find the atmosphere of the track.
The psychology of the dummy lyric technique is fascinating. When you are singing absolute gibberish over a chord progression, you are actively bypassing the analytical part of your brain.
You aren't trying to be clever or poetic.
No, not at all. You are purely responding to the emotional frequency of the chords. You're focusing on vowels and consonants that physically feel good to sing against the rhythm.
It's purely instinctual.
Exactly. But what often happens in that flow state, and what happened extensively here, is that your subconscious starts dropping real words into the gibberish.
Ah, I love that.
The phonetic sounds you naturally gravitate towards often dictate the actual theme of the final song.
It's like a musical Rorschach test. You just stare at the ink blot, or in this case, a repeating drum loop, until it looks like a butterfly or, a hit single.
Right.
It's a way of letting the music tell you what it wants to be about, rather than imposing an intellectual concept onto the music from the top down.
And maintaining that delicate subconscious flow state requires total safety and lack of judgment, which is why their next decision was so counterintuitive.
Oh yeah, cameras.
Genesis authorized a television documentary crew to film them during these very sessions for a special called No Admittance.
Introducing cameras into a space of pure vulnerability. I mean, think about this for a second. Have you ever tried to brainstorm a really sensitive project at work while your boss literally stands over your shoulder, watching your screen?
It's paralyzing.
It really is. Now imagine doing that, but your job requires you to sing gibberish and make terrible musical mistakes while trying to pull deep emotions out of thin air.
It's a nightmare scenario for an artist.
That's what the documentary crew felt like to a band relying entirely on pure improvisation.
Tony Banks explicitly admitted that the band would actively avoid any creative work when the cameras were rolling.
They just shut down.
Completely. He stated that as soon as the crew was there, they just shut off. Phil Collins completely agreed, pointing out that the atmosphere in the room changed the second the film crew walked in.
It's basic performance anxiety.
Exactly. When you know you are being recorded for a broadcast, you stop taking risks. You don't want to look foolish on camera, and looking foolish is a necessary step in the improvisational process.
Which makes you wonder. It really makes you speculate. Imagine how many potential song ideas, how many brilliant riffs or melodies were lost simply because the camera crew happened to walk into the room that day.
Right. A spark happens, the red light on the camera goes on, the band clams up, and the spark goes out forever.
It's a compelling what if. But despite the intrusion of the lenses, they eventually found their groove. They chalked away, they fine-tuned, and after 2.5 months, they had 15 workable tracks.
But having the raw clay is only half the battle.
Right. You need someone to mold it.
They knew they needed a new sonic architect to help them build the final product. They needed a shift in perspective.
And this leads us to a massive shift in their sound. We're moving from the songwriting phase to the technical evolution of the band.
The band made a highly deliberate, somewhat ruthless choice here. They replaced their longtime producer, Hugh Padgham.
Which is huge.
It is. Now, Padgham was an absolute legend in the Genesis ecosystem. He had worked with them since 1981's Abacab album.
He produced all of Phil Collins' massive solo albums in the 80s, right?
Yes, all of them. He was the architect of that gated reverb drum sound that literally defined the entire decade. But instead of sticking with the tried and true formula that made them billionaires, they brought in a 28-year-old producer named Nick Davis,
who had previously engineered some of their solo work. But still, let me stop you there. Firing the guy who helped make you the biggest band in the world to hire a 28-year-old.
It's a huge gamble.
That is an incredible risk. Most bands in their 40s would just hit repeat on the money-making machine.
Hiring Nick Davis was a hallmark of a band actively fighting against becoming a legacy act.
They didn't want to just be a nostalgia act.
Exactly. It is so easy to stagnate. But bringing in a younger producer with strong, challenging opinions forces the band out of their comfort zone.
And Davis was not afraid to push back.
Not at all. Davis had very strong ideas that actively challenged Tony Banks, pushing back on some of his synth arrangements. Davis specifically wanted to push Mike Rutherford's guitar much more prominently into the mix,
giving the album a rougher edge than their previous synth-heavy 80s work.
Right. And Rutherford fully leaned into this new direction. He actually ditched the guitar synthesizers that had defined so much of their previous sound.
He went back to a much more tactile, gritty setup.
We need to explain why that matters. In the 80s, Rutherford was heavily using Steinbergers.
Those are the headless guitars, right?
Yes. A Steinberger is one of those headless guitars you saw everywhere in the MTV era. They're often made of synthetic materials, they look like a small rectangle, and they have this very compressed, precise, almost clinical tone.
The sound of 80s pop.
Exactly. Mike wanted to ditch that entirely. He picked up a Fender Stratocaster.
A classic.
A Stratocaster has a woody, organic, unpredictable resonance that sounds like a human being is playing it, not a machine. He also used a Rickenbacker 12-string for the song Tell Me Why.
Which gives that bright, chiming folk rock sound.
Right.
But this brings us to my absolute favorite detail of this entire story. Here's where it gets really interesting. The cardboard guitar.
This is such a great story.
It's amazing. So Rutherford is a very tall guy. The standard Rickenbacker body was just too small for him to play comfortably. It looked like a toy on him.
It just didn't fit his frame.
No. So he asked the manufacturer to customize a larger one, and the manufacturer refused.
They said no to Mike Rutherford.
They said no to Mike Rutherford of Genesis. So what does this multi-millionaire rock star do? He goes full arts and crafts.
He literally cuts up a box.
Yes. He takes a piece of cardboard, cuts out the exact shape and size of the guitar body he wants, and mails the cardboard cutout to a master luthier named Roger Giffen with a note basically saying, "Build me this."
That perfectly encapsulates the ethos of these sessions, a DIY, whatever it takes mentality to get the exact physical feel and sound they wanted.
It shows that no matter how rich and famous you are, Sometimes you still have to do arts and crafts to get what you want.
It really does. And to add to that, Rutherford also ran all his guitars through a groove tubes amplifier, which gave the record a much warmer, punchier tone compared to the processed, direct-injected guitar sounds of the 80s.
So the guitar is sorted. But what about the keys?
Meanwhile, Tony Banks was utilizing a massive array of new synthesizers to build the atmospheric layers.
We should break down what Banks was actually doing, because it wasn't just pressing a button and getting a piano sound.
Far from it. He was using cutting-edge gear for 1991, like the Korg 01W and the EMU Emulator III.
Those were top of the line.
Oh, absolutely. The Korg 01W was revolutionary because it used a form of non-linear synthesis, meaning it could take standard sounds and warp them using complex algorithms to create these thick, shifting textures.
And the Emulator 3?
The EMU Emulator III was a high-end sampler. In 1991, sampling wasn't just dragging and dropping an audio file on a laptop like it is today.
No, it was a whole process.
It required massive hardware, floppy disks, and painstaking manipulation of audio waveforms.
Which explains how they got that incredible elephant noise on the track, Dreaming While You Sleep.
Yeah.
I always wondered what instrument that was.
It's not an instrument at all.
Right. Banks actually took a recording of Mike Rutherford just messing around, literally just bending two notes on his electric guitar.
Just a random guitar bend.
And Banks sampled that specific audio clip into the Emulator III, pitched it down, slowed it down, manipulated the waveform, and it ended up sounding exactly like a trumpeting elephant.
It's sound design as much as it is traditional songwriting. They were building completely new sonic landscape.
Which is so cool.
It really is. This grittier guitar sound, combined with these expansive, mysterious synth textures from Banks, created a very specific foundation. It allowed the band, and particularly Collins as the primary lyricist, to tackle some incredibly heavy real-world subject matter.
The music was practically begging for darker themes.
Exactly.
And this organic writing process naturally unearthed some very heavy stuff. This album is not just pop fluff.
Not even close.
The lyrical themes here are dealing with real-world gravity. Collins himself rated his lyrics on We Can't Dance as some of the very best of his entire career, noting that the music they were creating in those jams deeply stimulated him to write.
Thematically, the album is a major departure from the pure pop sheen of Invisible Touch. Let's look at the lead track, No Son of Mine.
A very heavy track.
Yes. This is a song that directly tackles the domestic abuse of a 15-year-old boy who finally runs away from home. And remember our earlier discussion about the dummy lyrics?
Yeah, the gibberish.
Right. The entire concept for this incredibly heavy narrative grew out of Collins simply repeating the phonetic phrase, no son of mine, over and over while jamming.
Wow.
The subconscious phrasing literally dictated a song about generational trauma and fractured families.
It's chilling. The music literally pulled that story out of him. And they didn't shy away from historical tragedy either.
No, they leaned right into it.
Let's talk about Driving the Last Spike. This is a 10-minute epic about 19th century Irish navvies.
The railway workers.
Right. These were the manual laborers who built the UK railway system under horrific, unsafe, often fatal working conditions. Collins was inspired to write it after someone gave him a book on the subject.
Structurally, Driving the Last Spike is a massive throwback to their progressive rock roots from the 1970s.
It feels very vintage Genesis.
It does. Tony Banks even purposefully used a Hammond organ patch to explicitly reference their early career. A Hammond organ has that swirling, gritty, gospel-infused sound that defined early prog rock bands.
It brings a sweeping theatricality to the song.
It turns it into a cinematic piece of music used to tell a story of immense human suffering and industrial exploitation.
I want you to consider the juxtaposition here. You are one of the biggest pop rock bands on the planet, known for inescapable radio hits, and you dedicate 10 minutes of premium album real estate to a historical epic about 19th century railway workers.
It's a bold move.
It's incredibly bold. The fact that they made that sound commercially viable, that it fits seamlessly on the same CD as pop singles, is a testament to Nick Davis' production and the band's sheer musicality.
They were completely fearless in their subject matter on this record. Dreaming While You Sleep, the track with the elephant sample, explores the agonizing psychological guilt of a hit-and-run driver who flees the scene and has to live with the secret.
It's dark, paranoid, and just suffocating.
It really captures that panic.
Yeah.
But perhaps the most emotionally devastating track on the entire album is Since I Lost You.
This one is incredibly raw.
It is.
Collins wrote this song for his close friend Eric Clapton, immediately following the tragic death of Clapton's young son, Connor, in March 1991. The timing is just heartbreaking.
The grief was so fresh.
Banks and Rutherford were in the studio the day the news broke, and they played some instrumental music they had been working on for Collins the very next day.
Collins said that straight away he started singing the melodies you hear on the final record over their chords. He took lines from an actual real-life conversation he had with a grieving Clapton and wove them directly into the lyrics.
That is just wow.
He didn't even tell Banks and Rutherford what the song was about until he had completely finished writing it. To take a real-life conversation with a friend in the deepest throes of grief and immediately turn it into art, that is an incredibly vulnerable, almost dangerously raw act of songwriting.
It strips away all the artifice of rock stardom.
It does. It's just pure empathy, translated into chords and melody.
Now, staying on the heavier themes, we also need to look at the song Tell Me Why, which tackles global conflict.
Right. Tell Me Why was written as a criticism of the Gulf War, which was happening at the time, as well as the plight of the Kurdish people in its aftermath.
Collins was inspired by a news report, right?
Yes. He was inspired by a television news report he saw while having dinner with his family, which caused him to mix his feelings about the war with previous thoughts he had regarding humanitarian crises in Bangladesh and Ethiopia.
Now, it's really important to note here for you listening that we're just looking at the historical timeline and the artistic intent they stated at the time.
Right, exactly.
We aren't here to debate the politics of the Gulf War or endorse any specific viewpoints, left or right. We're just impartially trying to understand what fueled the song based on the source material.
Precisely. We are just reporting what was in the room at the time. The focus is purely on the creative catalyst. Musically, Tell Me Why is notable because its original working title was Rickenbacker.
Named after the cardboard cutout guitar.
Yes. Specifically named after that 12-string Rickenbacker guitar, Mike Rutherford used to give the track its distinct, ringing folk rock sound.
Which contrasts sharply with the heavy lyrical subject matter.
It really does.
So we have an album dealing with domestic abuse, historical tragedy, hit and runs, profound personal grief, and global conflict. But a 71-minute album cannot just be pure devastation.
No, the listener would be exhausted.
Exactly. The human ear and the human heart needs a break. The band knew this. They purposefully balanced these heavy, sweeping tracks with sharp, biting, and surprisingly funny satire.
This brings us to the cynical side of their midlife perspective.
Yes. If the first half of their lyrical themes was about empathy, the second half is about cynicism and cultural critique.
Jesus, He Knows Me is a prime example of this.
Oh, totally.
This was a barbed, aggressive parody of the American televangelist movement. The band members had watched these preachers on television while touring the U.S. in the 80s and were struck by the blatant hypocrisy and the commercialization of faith.
The song and its accompanying music video took direct aim at that culture of monetized salvation.
And then you have the monster hit.
The one everyone knows.
The track that defined the album for casual listeners, I Can't Dance.
The music for this track is so heavy, so stomping.
It's got a real groove to it.
It's built entirely around this gritty, bluesy Mike Rutherford guitar riff and a very minimal Tony Banks electric piano part.
Which Banks noted was actually inspired by Traffic's 1968 song, Feelin' Alright.
Oh, interesting. But while the music struts with this macho blues energy, the lyrics are totally self-deprecating. It's a direct criticism and parody of the perfectly sculpted male models that were dominating popular jeans commercials at the time.
A dance is a masterclass in musical juxtaposition. You have this tough, primal blues rock track, but the guy singing it is essentially saying, I have no rhythm, I'm awkward, and I don't fit into this glossy, commercialized standard of beauty.
It's a brilliant contrast.
It really is. The critics are actually somewhat divided on it, though.
Really?
Yeah. David Brown of Entertainment Weekly perfectly captured its essence by calling it a polite primal stomp, and AllMusic really complimented its grittiness. But retrospective reviews, like Jim Allen of Ultimate Classic Rock, dismissed it as obnoxious pop-pap.
Wow, okay.
It's a song that forces a reaction precisely because it doesn't take itself seriously.
And the humor continued with the track Living Forever. This was Tony Banks taking a deeply cynical view of society's rising obsession with modern diets, fitness lifestyles, and the futile quest for immortality.
But the mechanism of how this song actually came to be is the best part.
I love this story. The working title was Hip Hop Brushes. Why? Because Phil Collins had just got some new sound discs for his EMU SP1200 drum machine.
The SB-1200 is a legendary piece of gear, particularly in early hip-hop, because of its gritty 12-bit sampling resolution.
It's an iconic machine.
So Collins spent about 10 minutes programming a hip-hop-oriented pattern using a snare brush sound preset. He pressed play, the band jammed over that specific loop, and a song was born.
It's like writing a best-selling novel just because you went to the store, bought a really cool new pen, and wanted to test the ink.
That's exactly what it is.
It highlights how the physical tools of technology directly dictate creation. Even the title of the album itself, We Can't Dance, was a self-deprecating nod to the fact that dance music and electronica were completely dominating the pop charts in 1991.
They were actively acknowledging their awkward place in the shifting musical landscape. They were a trio of guys in their 40s playing traditional instruments.
And the technology of the era dictated the physical shape of the album, too. They originally debated making this a double album, but they realized the market had decisively shifted from vinyl to CDs.
And the compact disc gave them exactly 74 minutes of continuous space.
They used 71 minutes and 59 seconds of it.
Talk about maximizing your space.
They really did. But even with all that room, they still had to cut 2 tracks, On the Shoreline and Hearts on Fire, which ended up being relegated to B-sides for the singles.
So they emerged from the farm in September 1991.
They had the heavy 10-minute epics, they had the satirical radio hits, they had 71 minutes of meticulously produced audio that bridged their prog rock past with a grittier pop present.
Now it's time to take it to the masses.
We Can't Dance.
Yep.
Dropped in November 1991.
Yeah.
And the chart dominance was absolute. It hit #1 in the UK for 2 non-consecutive weeks.
And in the US, it debuted at number 4 on the Billboard 200, and it just parked there. It stayed on the chart for 72 weeks.
The commercial certification is just staggering. It eventually went 5x platinum in the UK, signifying 1.5 million copies sold. In the US, it was certified 4x platinum by the RIAA, moving over 4 million copies.
And the industry recognized it, too. I Can't Dance earned a Grammy nomination for Best Pop Performance by a Duo or Group with Vocals, and the band won an American Music Award for Favorite Pop Rock Band.
It was a total victory lap.
But Genesis doesn't just do victory laps. They build mobile cities.
Oh man, the tour.
Yes. To support this massive album, they launched the 1992 We Can't Dance Tour. 68 dates in stadiums across North America and Europe, bringing along their longtime touring ringers, Chester Thompson on drums and Daryl Stumer on guitar and bass.
But the scale of this tour, it's mind-bending.
It really is.
This is where the business and the art intersect in a major way. The band's booking agent, Mike Farrell, noted that Genesis spent millions of their own money to build this tour.
Out of pocket.
Yes. They didn't rely entirely on promoters. They self-funded the technological leaps they wanted to make. I actually think that's insane. This raises an important question. Why would a band, already at the peak of their wealth and fame, risk millions of their own dollars on untested stage tech?
Because they saw the future of live entertainment. They recognized that stadium rock was fundamentally changing. You couldn't just stand on a stage with a spotlight and a wall of amplifiers anymore.
The fans expected more.
Much more. The visual spectacle was becoming just as important as the audio fidelity. So they built a 200-foot-long stage designed by Mark Brickman. They had 80-foot sound towers.
But the crown jewels were the screens.
The 3 movable Sony Jumbotrons.
They cost $5 million alone, in 1992 dollars. To move this entire setup from city to city required 42 semi-trucks. The logistics are equivalent to moving a military division every 3 days.
But the impact of those screens cannot be overstated.
It was revolutionary.
They were projecting custom artwork to illustrate the songs, and more importantly, live camera footage of the band. Suddenly, the fan in the absolute last row of a 70,000-seat stadium had a front-row view of Phil Collins' face.
It shrank the stadium. It created intimacy at a massive scale.
Exactly.
I compare those Jumbotrons to the early days of IMAX, or virtual reality. It was technology that completely recalibrated what audiences expected from live entertainment. Once you see a show with those screens, you can never go back to squinting at ant-sized musicians in the distance.
And speaking of technological revolutions, this tour featured another massive milestone for live music: in-ear monitors.
Oh, this is huge.
This is a crucial detail that changed the music industry forever. For the very first time, Phil Collins used an in-ear monitoring system.
We need to explain the physics of sound on stage to understand why this matters.
Right. Historically, singers relied on stage wedges, those massive speakers sitting on the floor pointing back at them to hear themselves over the band.
Right, and it's a constant volume war. The drummer hits harder, so the guitarist turns up their amp, so the singer asks the sound guy to turn up the wedge monitor.
It just escalates.
You have this massive wall of noise hitting you in the back from the arena, and a wall of noise hitting you in the front from the monitors. Singers would constantly blow out their vocal cords, straining to hear their own pitch over the chaos.
Exactly. But with in-ear monitors, you have a custom, isolated mix piped directly into your ear canal. It blocks out the chaotic noise of the stadium.
Which is a game changer for a vocalist.
Collins credited these in-ear monitors with allowing him to sing in tune effortlessly because he wasn't constantly fighting the acoustic environment. It saved his voice, it reduced his performance anxiety, and it completely changed the physical toll of touring for lead singers.
It's standard practice now, but Genesis was on the bleeding edge of adopting it.
They were evolving musically and they were evolving technologically. Interestingly, this tour was also notable for a subtraction.
Oh, right, the setlist change.
For the first time since 1978, they dropped the progressive epic in the Cage from their setlist. It was a subtle signal that while they were honoring their 25th anniversary on this tour with a medley of older material, they were firmly focused on the present and the future.
But the bittersweet reality is that, despite the multi-platinum success, despite the millions made, and despite having perfected the stadium stage setup, this would be the end of the road for this iteration of Genesis.
The door was closing. Collins wouldn't tour with them again until 2007.
So what does this all mean? We've traced a remarkable journey today. We watched a band return from the brink of absolute physical and emotional exhaustion.
A total reset.
We saw them isolate themselves on a farm, trusting in their shared history to pull music out of thin air, using gibberish to find their deepest thoughts. They created a 71-minute CD that masterfully balanced heartbreaking real-world tragedy with biting, cynical satire.
And they culminated it all with a record-breaking, technologically groundbreaking tour that reshaped how live music is experienced.
The enduring value of this deep dive is a reminder about the nature of creativity. Sometimes the greatest creative works do not happen when conditions are perfectly mapped out on a blueprint.
They happen when you are tired, when you are uncertain.
When the cameras are turned off and you simply get in a room with people you deeply trust and start making noise, letting the subconscious take the wheel.
Exactly.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We talked about how the band debated making We Can't Dance a double album, but ultimately used the 71-minute capacity of the relatively new CD format. I want you to think about how the physical limits of technology dictate the art we consume.
It's an interesting constraint.
If the compact disc hadn't been invented and they were forced to release a truncated, single vinyl 45-minute version of this album, cutting out the long 10-minute epics, would it have achieved the same legendary status? Or, conversely, if they had released a sprawling, four-sided double vinyl album, would all that extra space have diluted the punch of the pop hits? The medium didn't just carry the music. The physical limits of the plastic disc actively shaped the final legacy of Phil Collins' era in Genesis. Take care of yourselves and keep listening closely.